On tonight's episode of the Talkin' TV podcast, we break down the latest Bob Odenkirk starring action vehicle from the writer of John Wick, Nobody. Chris, I don't know about you, but this was a welcome surprise to Sandy because in addition to, being the first actual movie it seems like we've watched in a while, we actually got to go to a theater for this one.
Yeah, we actually got to hang out in a theater for this one. So
for once, in person, an actual in-person viewing. So, people, if you want to know and believe if the hype around this is real about all the good reviews that this has been getting, stay tuned for our official Talkin' TV review of Nobody. What's going on, buddy?
Not much, man. Very happy to talk about a movie I saw in theaters for the first time in over a year tonight, man.
Yeah, right. Pretending that, what's it called? Pretending that we didn't see each other like a couple of hours ago. No, but this is a unique situation because unlike myself, who was brave enough to go to, or in this case, stupid enough, whichever choice you choose, whichever word you choose to go with, I went and saw 5 movies in a theater during the pandemic, and this was Chris's first movie back. But it's so funny because, March has been such a jam-packed, exhausting month for us, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah.
I almost
For sure.
It's so weird to think that this is still, technically our last podcast of March, and then we still have Godzilla vs. Kong after this. I'm still just recovering from just the Snyder cut of it all. And the Snyder fans are still going strong as far as they're like, nah, we weren't satisfied with just the Snyder cut. Now we want the whole Snyderverse. I'm like, oh my God, there really is no appeasing, fans.
No, I think that's
general.
the only fan movement I can support at this point in time is Unleash the Snyderverse. It's the only one that warrants it.
Right. Well, that's the thing is that I guess just because they're the loudest and they're the ones that annoy me the most because even though, yes, I stand for what they want and I'm very much in favor of just, the fact that Warner Brothers are a bunch of fucking idiots who don't know what they're doing with their superhero properties. But what can I say? Just annoying fans are annoying to me. But the cool thing is that was not the case with this movie because what was interesting is that this movie, while it was while it should have had bases in things that would have prompted up to be big, it still managed to pull off that unique thing of being an original movie that came out and was able to get a little bit of traction. It's weird because theaters are in a weird position right now. They're not fully open, but they're in the process of reopening. Theaters here in New York have officially opened as of this past month, March 5th, and are going to continue to open throughout it. So it's really interesting, I feel like, first and foremost, that we should talk about how that's going to benefit this movie, kind of some of the other smaller movies going forward. Because the thing to keep in mind also is that there are going to be a lot of movies going forward that will debut exclusively in theaters that will get no attention or traction or conversation whatsoever. So I just wanted to kind of get your take on that first.
Yeah, I think they were bold to put this one out in theaters, in my opinion, because I have so many friends who are like, yeah, I can't go and see that. I can't risk it. I live with the parents. We were supposed to have a guy at the movies on tonight and he just didn't feel safe enough to go to the theater yet, and I don't blame him because we're still in the thick of this. And so I thought it was a bold move to not have any streaming alternative that wasn't behind a paywall. But hey, we went and saw the film and I respect them. I think any film that hasn't any company rather that hasn't struck one of those deals sort of where HBO has done where you can either go see it in theaters, Godzilla vs. Kong, or you can go and watch it the day of on HBO. I think that you need that right now. You need that peace of mind. Yeah. And I think that's actually the most fair of all the deals, the HBO deal, being that you can get it for free. But even if not, even I hate this company, but even Disney at least giving you the option to pay overpriced $30 for a film like Raya or go see it in theaters. The option. I just think you need that option.
It's the free choice because again, as much as we'd like to think that everything is moving back to normal, the fact of the situation is there is still a pandemic and not everyone has been vaccinated yet, and there is still a lot of fear and uncertainty in the air, even though it is mostly calmed down from where it was a year ago. So it's going to be interesting to see going forward kind of where the movie slate lines up as far as, what's going to be exclusive in theaters, what's going to have the kind of straddle the line between the streaming deals and the in-theater deals, what's going to go exclusively to streaming and kind of what gets gets the most traction and what gets the most attention outside of the big budget IPs that we know we're going to get attention going forward. I feel like this is the first of a lot of unique cases that we're going to have going forward for that for the rest of the year. And I'm excited to definitely break down each and every single one of them, you know? I definitely think that this movie, as opposed to the previous movie that I saw in theaters, which was Doug Liman's Chaos Walking, has a little bit of an edge because as opposed to that, which was like a weird... That movie was so weird because it felt like such a like a remnant of the YA dystopic era that kind of came in like the second half of the 2010 that kind of got started with Twilight and Hunger Games and then kind of died with Divergent and Maze Runner. And Chaos Walking was like a weird remnant of that.
Yeah.
But now you got Nobody, which is this movie that basically feels like it may as well have come out of the John Wick verse, and it makes sense because it's the same writer as John Wick. I mean, I know that for a fact that this writer has talked about kind of expanding the universe and making it into like this shared cinematic action verse for a while now, and so I think that's the first thing that gives this movie an edge, is the fact that it is an action movie, you know? And action movies... kind of straight up action movies, even though, again, they may be kind of being spearheaded by Mr. Tom Cruise, whose, you know, major franchises we may not be the biggest fan of as of right now. At the very least, it is kind of satisfying to see that action movies are kind of having this second life outside of the superhero genre, which seems to have sapped up just like every single genre. And then whatever genre just doesn't fit into the superhero genre just kind of gets spit out and left aside, you know, that being like, you know, your rom-coms, your comedies and stuff like that. And so, again, it's almost like a lot of because of the kind of stance of the superhero genre, a lot of these other genres have had to like drastically reshape themselves in order to kind of compete. You know, you've seen that with the horror movies. You've seen that with a couple of romance movies. A24, again, still doing what they do. And now you're getting movies like this, again, where John Wick was this precursor, where all of a sudden you get this combination of so many different things. You're getting like this slick, sleek, like almost dance-like choreography where you can actually see what's going on. And no longer do you have like the Liam Neeson shaky cam from like the late 2000s. You have like actual filmmakers that like are making these like high piece like genre action pieces, you know? You've got like all these you've got like lots of flares of like Hong Kong and like other you know like other what's it called, foreign types of filmmaking getting involved here. So that to me is still why John Wick made such a stamp, in addition to being like the ultimate comeback of all comebacks for Keanu, who had already had like kind of 2 or 3 at that point and was kind of like in this weird period in his career before John Wick kind of caused this super surge. And it kind of turned like everybody that was involved in that process like into superstars. Like I don't know if you knew this, but it turns I actually just found this out by listening to the John Wick 2 Rewatchables podcast, but the cinematographer for the first John Wick movie actually went on to shoot The Shape of Water, Dan Laustsen.
Wow.
Which I had no idea.
Yeah.
Like, talk about a jump right there, and he's actually shooting...
Like that movie or not, it won awards.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Unfortunately. But yeah, and he's now shooting Guillermo del Toro's next movie, Nightmare Alley. And so it was really interesting to kind of see how that transitioned, where you and I have obviously talked a lot about action movies and kind of how we feel like it's kind of gets away from some of the things that we don't like about some of the things that we enjoy so much about these types of movies. But the interesting thing is that, again, John Wick almost seems like, and kind of this movie that we're about to talk about kind of seems like the antithesis to that, as far as that these are action movies that actually are getting into like, you know, these cool things that we kind of do like about it. So I kind of wanted to pick your brain about that first.
Yeah, totally. So before we jump into that, I want to say what up to our loyal and loving chat. We got Jay Manley saying good evening to you, good sir. And so since a few people, I guess, haven't seen the movie yet, I think your question was a perfect way to do spoilers first, and then after I answer this question, we'll sort of dive into like the spoiler, because we can't skirt around spoiler.
Spoiler free.
Yeah,
first.
yeah, spoiler free first, just to like, you know, we got some loyal listeners, so
Of course.
and then we'll, because I think your question's a great way to tackle sort of what the film feels like without sort of breaking into specifics. But Jay, unfortunately, we can't stay spoiler free all night.
Yeah,
so,
not happening, buddy. Sorry.
But we'll let you know when to leave so we don't spoil anything for you, man. We'll try our best. And yeah, Brando show
Wait,
gets
what?
Brando show gets weird.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just
Go
gave me a
watch it.
whole
You're
different
gonna
reason
love it.
why to watch it. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah,
I can't wait.
All right, so with that being said, you kind of asked me about this film as it ties into the modern action film landscape, right?
Yeah.
So I think it'd be really cool, actually, if this was sort of not spoken about, but later on learned that this is actually a part of the John Wick universe. Because, while I haven't seen...
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I haven't seen John Wick yet. It's on my watch list. What I liked about this film was how, it had a unique voice, right? It had your typical action set pieces, of course, this being a smaller scale because of like the budget and where this film's shot in, but it had what you expect, but also it didn't have the forced humor that we see in the action films of today. It didn't have the forced romance. It didn't have a lot of the Disneyifications that really, I think, have spread out into other sort of film properties, like, what's DC doing but playing catch up to Disney? You know what I mean?
Or I feel like a better question is, what are they just doing in general?
Right, but they're at least trying to like do those stupid humor to cut the tension of the action scene like Disney does. So I actually really appreciate this film for being something refreshing in a genre that is very saturated right now. I think arguably it's the most popular genre of filmmaking right now. I mean, these are the big blockbuster films when they get franchise level, and I think this has that potential, but I like its quirkiness, I like its uniqueness, so I think it does a good sort of service to my argument of, hey, we should ask our action film creators, writers, directors to do more. It's still filmmaking, right? Never stop challenging yourself. Don't get comfortable within a medium. And I think if anything, this film shows how stagnant the rest of its competitors are, whether it's received well or not. That's just my personal take on it. What's going on, Ken, man? How you doing, brother?
I was about to say, well, you beat me to the punch, because I was about to say, I'm like, oh my God, Ken actually showed up at the beginning of one of our videos instead of the end. This is a moment right now. I want you to understand that. This is a moment, people. Like, this never happens.
But what's your take on that, man?
Well, on Ken, or?
Oh, no, on what I just said. I mean, I'm glad to have Ken here, but what's your take on
that? So it's funny that you bring that up, because we watched Face Off a couple weeks ago, right? That's kind of no secret now. And I mean, I think it's safe to say that movie does not play it close to the vest at all. Like, that movie is one of the most bombastic, over-the-top, ridiculous movies ever. Like, you want an example of, like, cutting the tension with a funny, jokey one-liner. I can't think of another movie. More like, talk about taking the tension, throwing it out the window, and then setting it on fire as it's falling to the ground, as those who are just winking and nodding at the camera constantly, But to that point, I think that kind of what this movie does, and kind of what the John Wick movies have, and kind of this subgenre that we're seeing, right? Because these movies are kind of a large part of a larger subgenre that we're only starting to become aware of. I feel like it was largely jump-started by The Raid, the Raid movies, which are kind of, again, they're kind of taking the idea of the modern action and kind of the traditionalist stories that we associate with action movies, and kind of shifting them into these newer versions. So, like, the cool thing about The Raid is The Raid basically plays out like a video game, where it's basically just like, it's a series of it's just a giant building of bad guys that these guys have to fight their way through all the way to the top, And it's kind of the similar thing, where the premise of the first John Wick movie is that a bunch of bad guys break into his house and kill his dog, who was the only leftover from his dead wife. And they do that brilliant thing that I told you about, where the number one way you want to sell in a movie just how fucking terrifying your main guy is, just show everyone else scared shitless. And I don't want to start ripping on this movie just yet, because again, I can't fault this movie for ripping a lot from John Wick, because it's the same writer. And again, this was very clearly being set up to interact with the John Wick universe at some point. I'll get to that in a little bit. But I think that what this movie has, like that unique voice that you were talking about, is it has not a story per se, but it has compelling characters, and it has fun with its premise, but it also takes itself seriously, and it rides a line, and it knows that it's an entertaining movie first. I think the thing that kind of is lost on us, I'll say, with the Mission Impossible movies is I definitely think that it's a thing of where you said it best, where those movies have devolved into what is the latest stunt that Tom Cruise is going to do, because there's been so many of those movies now that by sheer nature of it, you automatically tune out, because you know what's going to happen. You know they're going to save the day at the end, and you know that they're going to be back for the next adventure in a couple years.
It's too predictable.
That's going to have even crazier stunts, It saps the enjoyment from the movie, because you're not going for it to watch the movie, you're going for it to watch the stunts, But this is the opposite. This is this Nobody and the John Wick movies and all these other kind of low-key action movies, they're made by people who want to make entertaining movies first and foremost. That's kind of my take on it.
I think you're totally right, because these guys, I guess some of it factors into, the studio they're working for and the franchise that they get hired for. There's not really...
Also just what they're comfortable with doing, too.
Yeah, true. I mean, but there's not really when you work for Marvel, I would assume that there are certain beats or there's a certain, feeling you have to impart in each film, even if it's some films that are as different. Like, for example, I'd say Ant-Man and, Winter Soldier are complete different ends of the Marvel spectrum, but they still have that core trademark Marvel feeling, right? Whereas this not being a part of a major franchise, and maybe it will be, maybe it won't be, right? We don't know. But as of now, it's not. I think it kind of benefits by sort of being a little bit under the radar. It kind of has some legs because of the fact that it doesn't have to play by anyone's rules, and so I think that's a big factor. But also, man, I think that this film also kind of like really captured how you would picture Bob Odenkirk being in this type of scenario, just to transition a little bit. Like, they really were like, like everyone loves to play the what if game. Like, what if we got a Batfleck movie? I know I've been thinking about that a lot lately. So these guys...
I'm still 50-50 on that, but I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm sold on that. But anyways, these guys like did a great job of imagining what if Bob Odenkirk was a badass former FBI fixer. Like, what if?
Or auditor in this case, as he says.
Auditor, as he says. And they nail it. They really absolutely nail it. And so, with that being said, you think it's time to jump into spoilers?
Yeah. Well, no, not just spoilers. Okay, I just wanted to give, kind of my general thoughts on it overall, which is, look, it's so annoying because, again, it's impossible to watch a movie without go into a movie completely blind anymore. There's always going to be some element just because of who we are as what we watch associated with it. Again, I watch all 3 John Wick movies. I love all 3 of those movies. They're freaking awesome, and they kind of restored. It's like, action movies can actually still be cool and have these really awesome, engaging stories, and just be really freaking badass too. Like the fact that John Wick 3 can have a sequence where he literally just wanders around in the desert to seemingly find like this group of traitors, and then just kind of just get transported back to New York City within 2 scenes and have it all matter and have it be important is awesome. But taking into account kind of the Odenkirk aspect of it, that to me was the element where I'm like, okay, this is interesting. This is new because the Odenkirk aspect of it, right? Because we talked about the John Wick aspect of it, right? We kind of can't not because it's the same writer. But the Odenkirk aspect of it is interesting because this is a guy who, for the most part, has not been associated with action movies. And this is another interesting thing that hasn't happened in a while, where you haven't seen an actor try to jump from genres so quickly. Like we kind of have become deconditioned to it because of the age of the internet that we're in, which is kind of like broken down kind of a lot of the traditionalist barriers that were associated with movies pre the internet age. But like, Bob Odenkirk is a guy who you look at it, it's like, Saul from Better Call Saul, and he's kind of a couple of cool, funny voiceovers, and obviously he's got his origins in sketch comedy and everything, but you don't think of him as an action star, But, like, this is kind of the equivalent of a move of, say, like, Robin Williams or Jim Carrey when they tried to jump from, like, comedy to drama, That's what this was to me, and when that scenario happened, it either really works or it really doesn't, and I'm just really happy that in this case, it worked, because Odenkirk just takes everything that he does that just kind of makes him awesome, kind of like, I think that what Odenkirk has done recently with some of his performances, particularly on Better Call Saul, is he's done a really good job of using kind of his charming personality and his overall veneer to really channel like this really deep sense of self-insecurity that he's kind of channeling across all his roles. And that to me is still what makes his character of Jimmy so endearing enough to separate it from, the previous iteration that we saw on Breaking Bad. And we see that here, and it's done super well. And again, it plays itself into the movie perfectly well because, once again, that sense of kind of insecurity and how that's used as the facade for what he really is, but also how that plays into his character is really, really freaking well done here. And that's before we even get into any of the awesome action.
Yeah, you're totally right, man. Their ability to capture his comedic side, but then not drown this film in comedy is so brilliant, because the strange thing about this film while you're watching it, you'll kind of think to yourself like, okay, this is simultaneously the Bob Odenkirk that I know and love, yet it's so different and it feels so refreshing to see him take this on, but then you're confused because you're asking yourself, well, how does it still feel so familiar though? And it's just one of those beautiful situations that come when everything clicks and, the creators know their actor and they know who they're writing for. And it's kind of like this quirky story too, that only he can really fit in. Like, I don't know, everyone has an alternate casting for everything. I'm not one to do that typically, but I'd like to think those people would have trouble alternatively casting this film more so than most, because man, he just gels,
Well, the whole thing about it is that we've kind of gotten into this stance where the internet is kind of conditioned us. It's like, if an actor is just playing themselves and they're not giving a good performance, we've kind of gotten into that sense. It's like, this person is only playing themselves, But like, I kind of have always been a little bit confused by that, because I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? Because guess what? You like you like this person's personality. It's the whole reason why they're an actor in the first place. So why is them playing a version of themselves used as a negative when that's what you like watching about it? So that kind of criticism has kind of never really made sense to me as far as that goes. But on the apropos of that, like, it is also really cool when an actor can kind of switch genres like that, while at the same time, like, kind of still carrying over those core elements that, like, people like about that, you know? That's the stuff that, like, I really did.
Right. No, yeah. I mean, I never actually felt that he was playing himself in this, though. That to me is a crazy statement given the movie we're watching. But I do think he has such a unique style, and he's able to sort of shapeshift his style to whatever he's in, whether it be his early days with, like, you know, Bob and David, whatever the original incarnation of that show was.
Mr.
Show, or everything we've seen him do from Breaking Bad into what I've heard you say about Better Call Saul. I mean, but he still has that sort of comedic charm, but his comedic range is so broad that he's able to, I would say, like a chameleon, sort of adapt to whatever setting he's in, sort of blend in with whatever setting he's in. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Like, you really see the versatility in his range with him playing this character in this film. His first real action appearance, I mean, sure, he gets beat up a few times from Breaking Bad, but there's a big difference because he's the one kicking ass in this one, and that's not a spoiler, Jay, or anyone else. That's just a fact of the matter.
It's so funny because you just gave me a quick flashback to that scene in Breaking Bad when Walt finds out that Saul had Mike bug his house, and so then then Saul reveals that that's how they found out that Skylar Machine got him, and it causes Walt to attack him, and they're just fighting, and it's the funniest thing ever because it's two like 40-year-old men just like farting around on the floor, and then Mike just has to breathe out slowly before he finally just gets up and then pulls Walt off of Saul, and it's the funniest thing, and it's so crazy when I'm thinking about it, and I'm watching him kick ass in this movie, and I'm like, what the hell? Because it's so funny because at first, like that first action sequence, right, where he really first has to lay down, like on the bus, and it starts, and I'm like, oh, is he gonna be able to pull this off? You know, because like here's the thing, like because Keanu and Bob Odenkirk are roughly around the same age, but Keanu had a history of doing action movies, and he trained extensively for this part. You know, like, I'm not going to say that, like, there wasn't any preparation. I'm not, like, trying to suggest that there was no preparation involved, only because these weren't the same directors as John Wick, even though it was the same writer. So when you first saw that choreography, I'm like, oh, is this not going to work? But then, so it took a little bit more time to adjust. But once he gets into it, oh, man, he throws down in ways that, like, I didn't think was possible. And the cool thing about that, too, is that he's not John Wick, so he doesn't need to do, like, this cool kung fu choreography, which I thought was going to happen. I thought he was going to pull it out. It's like, oh, he's a secret kung fu master, you know? But he wasn't. He was still, like, kind of a regular guy who was just a really good fighter, like, using everyday items, just, like, take out all of these guys. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah. And I miss this from these movies,
he was resourceful. And you know what's funny? I didn't really feel that about the first action fight scene. I remember you sort of saying that on our car ride back from the theater. I kind of was instantly hooked because I liked how his style sort of reflected his personality. You know, I oftentimes feel that some of the best action moments happen, and I actually really, you weren't there, when me and Brando did our Falcon and Winter Soldier watch along this past Friday, a recap of our weekly recap series for that show. I felt that the way they introduced the new Captain America, right, the Walker character, I thought that introduction in the fight scene and the way that he was so valiant and the way that he, you know, threw his shield to save his partner as he was flying off the bus, those are moments that were character development in the middle of an action set piece. And the thing about that is I feel like we've really gotten away from that type of physical storytelling in action films, which, so you said earlier, Face Off has its quirky moments, has its humor, but the thing is, to me, it's different, right? Because everything has a place and a purpose, whereas I feel that in the modern day, people just insert jokes because audiences are expecting it, and it worked back in the early days of Iron Man, Thor, you know what I'm talking about, Hulk. Yeah. And so what I felt they did in that moment was, and yes, you're right, it does ramp up, and he gets obviously more comfortable as he's coming out of, you know, retirement later on in the movie, without spoiling too much, picking my words wise there. I felt that they did a great job of sort of showing where he was at in that point in life, right? It's the first act, it's his first fight, and so while it was slow, I appreciated it because it's kind of the physical storytelling I miss from those action films that I grew up watching. And so that's I guess what I mean when I say action films have sort of lost some of that movie magic that storytelling magic that I used to love and sort of tout them for. Did you feel that way at all, or about that moment? Or
I mean, you just hit the nail on the head right there, which is that action. You said it, where it's action storytelling. It's even if it's action, it's still storytelling. Action still tells a story. You know, it is still a fight scene, but you still have to fight that opponent. You know, that opponent is your antagonist in the moment. You know, you have to come up with ways in order to defeat said antagonist. You know, you need to set up conflict resolution, and that action is still storytelling. And so you're right. And the reason, again, what has been lost in the modern day is the fact that somewhere along the line it just became a matter of, oh, we're just not telling stories anymore, we're just setting up for stunts, and that's kind of all that we're doing. And this movie, among everything else, is just that it was what's it called? Is that it reminded us, no, like, this is a story, you know? And so, like, when you're seeing the opening scene of, like, him just kind of, the quick cut montage of him, like, going through, like, the humdrum of his daily life, I'm like, oh, man. See, I'm like, this is the types of shit that I fucks with. This is the type of shit that I miss from these types of movies, because we need this slow buildup in order to make the action scene so awesome and in order to finish up the story, because even though I don't know exactly what it's going to be, I know in my mind of mine. And this is in the sense of, like, where it's like, oh, I'm able to predict this, so therefore it's boring. In the sense of where, oh, I'm kind of playing along with the game that the movie is playing with the audience. You know, that type of synergy, which a lot of movies, quite frankly, have been missing. Where I'm like, okay, now when he pulls out the action badass one-liner, when he starts threatening people, and then once more is revealed, it's like, it's a progressive trickle down. You know, again, it's the whole thing we got from Meg. It's you want to leave people with an impression without telling them everything. And that's exactly what I got from it.
Yeah, no, 100%. I couldn't agree more with all that. And so the last sort of bit of spoiler-free talk that I kind of wanted to bring up before we jump into the spoiler section is, I thought they did a great job sort of working with the scale of this film. You know, clearly, I guess they have, with the way that they sort of, left this off, there is possibility for more, and that's already been said in, like, articles and press outlets before this film came out. So with that in mind, maybe like the first film, the budget's always going to be smaller, and it clearly wasn't that large of a budget in this movie. I mean, the first fight literally takes place on a bus, a super tight, knit, closed space. Then there's the house that they utilize, this just normal suburban home. You've seen it millions of times, 2-car garage on top of one another, outskirts of a city, sort of suburbia. And I thought they did a really good job of not only using their element and their environment to enrich the character, but to sort of how they got so creative in these environments and made these action sequences so intense and so riveting.
Well, because
was brilliant.
What was the budget?
We didn't need someone jumping on the side of an airplane. We didn't need explosions on top of explosions. It was tasteful, and I really appreciated it for that. And I think that's kind of, unfortunately, as this film franchise, if it gets legs, which I think it will, we might lose that because everyone's going to want to go for, like, the Michael Bay explosion type thing. But I do appreciate that we at least have this film to show, again, back to the action storytelling, that, you don't always need all the bells and whistles to create something interesting. Like, sometimes, like, you should live and die by what your story's about and your characters in that environment contributing to the story. Like, you don't always need to have, like, what's your thing about the Transformers, right? They just get more and more ridiculous, and so, like, the story gets lost.
Don't get me started. This will become a Transformers podcast.
Well, the story gets lost in the spectacle, I guess, and you don't always need that to happen.
But I guess the difference with the Transformers movies is that the Transformers kind of know that they're only about spectacle. Like, that's why that's what it is that I like about Michael Bay. Michael Bay is one of the only people that can actually capture, like, the true cynicism of Hollywood. It's like, yeah, I know that you guys don't actually give a shit about the story. You only show up for the explosions. So I'm literally going to make that the epicenter of the movie to the point where it feels like I'm trolling you. So that's kind of where I get the charm, because I'm like, I respect a good troll, So, but real quick, so it's funny that you mentioned the, what's it called, the budget. So I want you to take a guess to what the budget was for this. Just take a guess. Rough number.
All right. For some reason,
Ballpark.
50 million comes to mind.
50?
50.
50. Okay. 16.
16. Wow.
16.
Even less than I thought.
Oh, I'm about to blow your mind even more. So I'm going to tell you the budget for the first John Wick movie, right? Not any of the sequels, because they did go up with the sequels, but the first John Wick movie.
Yeah, let's hear that, man. I'm really impressed now just hearing that. That's crazy to me.
All right. So the first John Wick movie, which, keep in mind, starred obviously Keanu Reeves, but also starred Ian McShane, John Leguizamo, Willem Dafoe, Alfie Allen at the time, season 4, Theon Greyjoy. And so take a ballpark as to that movie, just the first movie.
Well, now I was going to say higher because of, it's John Wick, but now you're making me think it's even less than 16 million.
Well, the only thing to keep in mind that Keanu is a much more valuable movie star, we'll say, than Bob Odenkirk. So keep that in mind as well.
But but you said earlier he was on a comeback, so I'm just gonna guess it's 12 million because I think it has to be less than Nobody because of the way you framed it. But I could be wrong. Tell me.
20 to 30. 20 to 30.
20 to 30. Okay, damn.
20 to 30.
All right. Well,
yeah.
I'm so impressed.
So the reason why the sets feel so constrained and so limited is because it is. Like, they shot this movie for, again, like the budget of like a Blumhouse horror movie, and yet you see what they're capable of. And like, that's the type of shit that I love. It's like, yes, this is filmmaking, taking what little resources that you have and making something awesome out of it. You know, it's like, it's what we were taught as filmmakers.
Who is this writer? What's his name?
His name is Derek Kolstad. Is his name.
I'm a huge fan. I'm about to go look up everything he's done and watch it over the course of this week. Like,
so you want to get into spoilers about this movie?
It's about
time. Again, there's a lot to talk about this movie with just in general, because like, it's insane, because this is the first action movie in a while where I'm like, oh my god, like, these actually are like colorful characters with like a really fun, crazy villain and all these weird supporting characters, and I kind of want to know more about like this world and what's going on. Like, he walks into this tattoo parlor, shows off this tattoo, and scares off this one Vietnam vet. I'm like, how the hell does this guy know about this? You know, like, they tell you obviously that he's an auditor for the FBI, but like, Jesus, he's this scary that like everyone knows about him. Like, the cool thing that's established in the John Wick movies is, and I'll actually get into that because that is a tiny criticism that I have with this movie, which the John Wick movies do this incredible job of setting up this insane mythology that is back behind it, where it's revealed that John Wick, it was actually a part of this secret kind of like underground coven of assassins, this underground like globe-trotting coven of assassins that have like these different pockmarks in like all different sects of the world with like their own currency and everything, and that plays such a tremendous part in those movies going forward, and they had bits of that in this movie where it's like little hints as far as that goes, and they kind of sort of told you. But the thing that this movie did not do that John Wick did, which is this movie left a lot of stuff open-ended. Like, you had that awesome shoot at the end when it's revealed obviously that the guy, and again, there was a lot more use of visual storytelling, but where it's revealed that the guy that he's talking to on the radio at the end is actually his adopted brother, who was revealed to be played by the RZA, who was in the movie, and his dad is Christopher Lloyd, and it's hinted at obviously that he was trained for this since he was a kid, but they never actually say it. You know, like, there was a lot of stuff that felt like it was left open to interpretation, where it felt like it's like, okay, this was cutting room floor stuff that was like setting up for a sequel, but like, I guess that's kind of like the only criticism I have is this movie was an hour and a half and it could have so easily been 2 hours, you know?
Yeah, it definitely leaves you wanting more. That's for sure. Because, like you said, the backstory, while it was there, was very light and very peppered in, and they really did a good job of keeping the pace up with the action and sort of moving the film along through the physical acting. And so, you know, because of that, we really didn't have much time for, you know, because there is a rich backstory here. Like, I want to know more about his father, right? I want to know more about...
Yeah. Oh, man.
I want to know more about their involvement with the FBI, right? I want to know more about his friend who he speaks to on the spy radio, and it's not just in his head. That's actually crazy spy technology that he has, and he's actually sitting there apparently listening to his friend who's in hiding, just playing saxophone, jazz saxophone, or trumpet rather, and getting pretty good, he says. And I want to know more about this world, this network, this underbelly that is apparently, you know, living inside of the city that he lives in. And yeah, there's a lot to be, they did a good job, I think, of working within the budget. Now that I know, I already knew it was a small budget, just like having a general sense of how these things work. But now that I know it's like a Blumhouse small budget, they did a great job of just peppering in what you need to know, leaving it open for intrigue and want and craving for more. Like, I'm craving more from this universe because it was just so refreshing. But man, like, they really impressed me with that, because yeah, there's so much more story to tell. Like, let me ask you this. I feel like we got a lot of story told here, but then I also feel like we didn't. But if you feel we didn't, for some reason, I'm okay with that. You know, like, what's your take on that?
So
man?
Again, I'll go back to my point before where I said impression over telling you everything, which is, again, while I am a little bit, I'm not going to say annoyed, but a little bit kind of like, oh, when I don't get like kind of like the backstory. I understand why it's not there, and the movie itself is still awesome enough where it's like, okay, that's not gonna bother me You know, to the point where it's like, obviously in a lesser movie where the actual main plot story, which again, this is what 90% of most, you know, generic movies have to deal with, is the fact that their plots are not actually that interesting, so they have to rely on these gigantic backstories that 9 out of 10 times end up being more interesting than the actual story itself. But this was not that case, obviously. The story that they itself had to tell was freaking awesome, you know, which is, the basic story is that Bob Odenkirk is this guy who kind of feels a little bit, is not totally emasculated, but definitely feels like he's in a little bit of an emasculated situation. Family definitely looks down on him after he handles a home break-in after a very certain way, you know? But it kind of ends up, you know, spiraling out of control after he realizes that, oh, maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to do. But this is where the movie kind of gets weird, because we're led to believe that he's acting out of this kind of weird midlife crisis sense, but then it's actually revealed that it's like, no, he was always kind of like this sociopathic killer, and he was just kind of like resisting those urges for a while. So it creates a little bit of a dissonance as far as the motivation of the character, but it all kind of goes out the window once the action starts, because of course, in his quest to get one of the items that was stolen from his house back, he ends up getting into a fight with a bunch of Russians who are just drunkenly taking over a bus, and he ends up destroying each and every single one of them. And of course, one of them happens to be the brother of the newest, craziest Russian mobster in town, who is going after him. I gotta say, the quick caveat, and again, just attention to detail that I love, is when he slices the one guy's throat and then puts the straw in so that he can still breathe. I'm like, that is fucking brilliant. Like, that's the shit that we need more of in movies.
I couldn't agree more. You know, you're totally right, man. The impression this movie gives is so profound. It's just, man, it just leaves such a feeling of, you know, for me at least, longing for these types of films to sort of come back to the front row and center of the action film zeitgeist, which I don't quite know if it will happen. I can't wait to watch John Wick and then sort of be able to give that on my on this channel here, give my impression on that, because I mean, I can't not believe this writer doesn't, because, dude, what I'm trying to say is, you're totally right, man. Like, there isn't much story, but the story we get is so well written and every action is justified that it doesn't really feel like an action film, because most of the times when I'm watching action films this day and age, I've kind of realized, as we've been studying so many of these lately on the channel, it's like the action kind of justifies the corny jokes and the bad writing, and while it's cool, it's just sort of a way for me to not really tune out or to keep me going until the end of the film, whereas every second of this film felt purposeful, you know. And I get it, you guys are gonna all be like, well, the Marvel universe, they built up to the, you know, fucking Thanos, and it's like, okay, but like, how much of that was needed? You know, you could really trim a lot of fat off that. And beg the question.
Meanwhile, again, not to be that guy, but Snyder was going to do the equivalent of 23 movies in 3 movies, so...
Right, exactly. That's a perfect example. People have their issues with the Snyderverse. And
I'm a Marvel fan, too.
You are, yeah. And look, I get that a lot of people have issues with the Snyderverse, and it's all a matter of taste, and it's all subjective. But for me personally, I think there's something to say when this movie, this silly little movie on a $16 million budget is evoking such deep thought and emotion in regards to like how it affects, and I hope it will affect the entire action movie zeitgeist, man. It's like, I did not think when we were taking that car ride out to the theater that this would be a conversation we'd have off this movie. Like, I honestly expected this to be like, oh, cool, like a little fun little Bob Odenkirk movie. It's nice to see what he's up to. That was a good night. I hung out with Tom at the theater. But nah, man, like, this movie is so much more than that.
Nah. And it's so funny, too, because now you kind of get that special feel that it got. Because it was so weird, because when I got into John Wick, somebody kind of like had to push me, because I'm like, why the fuck am I going to watch a Keanu Reeves movie? Keanu Reeves hasn't made a good movie in 25 years at that point. And then I watched that, I'm like, what the hell is this? And give me more. And then we get the sequel, and the sequel we get 2 sequels, and the 2 sequels just blow it up even further and further. So by the time we get to John Wick 3, I'm locked in and ready to go. And I'm like, let's fucking go. And that movie starts from minute 0, and it does not stop until it hits like the 2-hour mark. And I'm really glad, because this movie was kind of the exact same way. And I'm, like I said, I just miss that, because it really sucks when you're kind of conditioned to expect a mediocre movie, and as a result, it kind of causes you to give them more pads. Like, that, again, like, it really is, I guess, like, kind of my avarice towards the Marvel movies are really starting to show as I get older, where I really am starting to realize that they really kind of have inspired this kind of era of mediocrity just because of the source material that they're pulling from and the types of stories that they tell. And it really sucks, because it causes all these other awesome movies that are actually, like, much more well-told stories that are much more engaging with much better and more well fleshed out and rich characters to kind of fall through the cracks, and it's kind of sad. you know? It's kind of a thing that I never really realized before until now.
Era of mediocrity is an amazing way to phrase that. I think that's so true. It really is.
Why is it that A24, a studio that 9 out of 10 regular people have never heard of, made some almost all the best movies of this past decade?
I also agree with that. You know, man, it's because the problem. Well, not the problem. They do a great job of it. Disney puts themselves everywhere. Like, to be honest with you, you know, this film, I didn't really see much marketing for it. I mean, I know that it was out there and it had the YouTube advertisement and all that, but like, Disney gets their shit on gum. They get, you know, like I have Avengers gum, dude, from, Trident, man. Like, they put their advertising everywhere, toothbrushes, billboards, and sure, small films like this can't do that. But then I wonder, would they be able to do that had those first few films not set a precedent that millions of people loved? So I think to myself, and we've kind of been speaking about this a lot lately, you know, I think to myself, like, do audiences just not want to think anymore when it comes to action films, right? Do they want to know the differentiation between, like, hey, I don't want to go see an A24 film because my film friend took me to an A24 film one time and it really wasn't enjoyable. Like, I had to really sit there and concentrate, and I don't want to do that in a theater. So you look back at the older action films, the older franchises of the 90s, and even that first Mission Impossible film, I think, begs deeper questions than any of its predecessors or, any of the films that follow. And I just wonder, man, like, if Disney really is to blame too much because they're just doing their job.
You know what I think the other thing, too, is that kind of we don't realize is that the idea of audiences, you know, wanting to think. I am still of the opinion audiences have never gone to movies to think. They never have. They've always gone for entertainment. I just think that the difference is that just where the kind of the art and the talent has been attracted to, you know, and where it's going now. Where before, kind of, you know, audiences were going to show up no matter what, and it was kind of more spread out, and there was a little bit more competition. And now, because Disney has kind of triumphed as this monolith that everyone else is kind of like trying to kind of climb under because of the success that they've had first with their animated hits and then with the success of the Marvel movies. It's kind of, again, it reframed the industry in a way where it's like now everyone is trying to get to them because of how much money they generate, so much so that the actual artistry of it is kind of just like filtering through the window, you know? And then you also take into account the social media aspect of it where, again, like the only movies now that are going to do well are the movies that generate the most memes, and Marvel movies generate more memes than anything, you know? So, like, you take those two things into consideration, and I think those two also have a lot to say about it. But real quick, so if we can get back to Nobody and kind of how that factors in,
sure.
I still think that there is, I don't want to say a place for these movies because I still don't buy into that, and I still don't believe in the idea that a movie has to be made exclusively for streaming as opposed to be exclusively for theater. I think that comes entirely down to audience subjectivity and how they want to view their movies. I personally have never bought into that logic. I'm like, if you want my perfect opinion, I think every movie should now be made available simultaneously for in theaters and streaming. I don't care if you're Disney, I don't care if you're A24, I don't care if you're anything. I think it should be like, look, these studios are going to make their money no matter what on these, you know? So my take is the whole forcing theaters forcing to choose between theaters and streaming. I've never really bought into that, and I kind of don't like that because, again, it's restriction on choice, and I'm never for that. So my whole thing is put every movie now in theaters and streaming and see what does better. You know, I think that's a way better metric for determination of success for these things going forward than being like, oh, this thing feels more like a streaming movie because it feels like not as many people go out to a theater and see it, you know? We were at the theater. We saw people going in. We saw people wanted to go out, you know? The fear factor on everyone has not gone away, but it's definitely lessened because there are people that want to go out. There are people that want to go out and experience things and not sit in their house, you know?
Yeah, dude, I totally agree with you. I think at this point in time, you need to give people the choice because I think there's always going to be people who have good reasons to not want to go out and not want to take the risk, underlying health conditions, all that type of stuff. But then again, there also were people waiting in line. Now, granted, I don't think there were as many as you were making it out to seem. It was a pretty thinly packed theater. It was also a Thursday night, though. I will give you that. I know there's probably a lot of people, specifically young people, who are chomping at the bit to get out on a Friday, Saturday night and go see a movie. So I'm sure if we would have went Friday, we would have been, socially distanced, 1 seat apart, 2 seats apart with a packed theater otherwise. And yeah, I think that, like, these types of films, to not do that, these types of small films that have this big ambition, clearly this movie was left open-ended. They have several different directions they can take it, and they want you to ask them for more. They're just waiting for this film to get greenlight for, Nobody 2 or whatever they would call it, right? So with that being said, man, I totally see what you're saying, because the one thing I think they're foolish for is not striking a deal. And this might not be clearly it's not the filmmaker's decision, it's the studio's decision. I think the studio needs to nurture smaller studios or films that aren't a part of big franchises. The studios need to nurture these films.
Back in the day, Disney back in the day had these smaller studios that would put out stuff like Touchstone Media. What's it called? I can't remember the name of the other ones, and they were responsible for. Did you know in 1999 and 2000, Disney was the studio behind The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, Shyamalan's two biggest successes?
I had no idea about that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically,
that's what they need
sort
to
of
do.
Nurturing, right? Sort of lending a hand or investing rather in, because no one's doing it for free, investing in a smaller studio, a smaller film like Nobody. I'm just upset that wasn't here, because I like this film so much. I'm such a fan of this film. And so I really do see it getting affected in the long run, because critics can tout it all they want, right? Every critic saw it. Most critics got screeners, though, comfortably watching it from their house. And the people like us who are just diehard movie fans, we were going to go see it regardless, right? But then like our friends, none of my friends have even heard about this film, let alone seen it, because they're so not movie-minded right now. They're still trying to stay safe. And so the fact that there's not a streaming alternative that's free for this film, or at least affordable, not up in the $25, $30 range, I think that is my only real negative. And I have maybe one negative in regards to like the actual film itself, but that's a huge negative if you think about how I really want this film to continue being such a fan and get legs. I mean, I just don't know how many eyeballs are going to be on this in the moment that's going to make or break it. Now is where they want to see, is this worth making another one for? I don't know. It seems neglectful to me.
That's the trick, is because that's going to be the key for determining this is the new metric of success for movies, is how many eyes can we get this movie on, because again, we now know box office is no longer the sole metric success for movies. It's kind of been this way sneaking up for a couple of years now, but it really is solidified, especially in 2020, that the metric of success for a movie is how many eyes get on it and how many people are talking about it. That is what determines the metric of success. And I think that by restricting it to only be available to be viewed in this one viewing sphere, in a time where people are still, the majority of people are still skeptical about going out to a theater. Half the people haven't even heard about this movie because of just the overall general advertisement for it. Like, that to me is the thing where they need to start like kind of paying attention to, if they want to make, like, for these studios that want to make these types of other movies and have them succeed,
Yeah. I hope that.
And it's a thing that we have to talk about, because this is the stuff that will allow us to get our favorite movies continue to be made.
Totally, and especially, someone like me who really feels that this was the first step in the right direction that action films haven't been taking for quite some time.
Right.
It's very frustrating, because I kind of feel like they dropped the ball. I mean, you just said it. Not many people know about this outside of really the cinephile film community. And to me, that's just, I get it. Times are tough.
And
Wallets
what's
are thin,
so depressing? But you know what's even more depressing about that? And this is something that applied to kind of a lot of the movies even before the pandemic, is that now with kind of that what you just said, as far as kind of the whole, and nobody really outside of the film critic community knows about that. That's really the case for every single movie now that's not a Marvel, a DC, a Star Wars, or another big franchise. That's every single movie. Like, I swear, outside of my cinephile community, nobody knows what A24 is. People, I'm still convinced that the only reason why people know what Uncut Gems is because of Adam Sandler, and because of the range that Adam Sandler has, Yep. And even with this movie, at the very least, like, John Wick was like the one rare case that was able to break through the mold and was able to generate enough of a following in order to justify getting a very well-earned franchise, and now is kind of taking its spot within the franchise. But, like, how do you tell this to somebody? Oh, go see the new movie, Nobody. They're like, what? What is that movie? And they're like, oh, it's with Saul from Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. And they're like, who?
Yeah, dude.
Like, well, how do you
You're right,
that?
because now people have superhero TV shows, so the medium that maybe they could get a different style of storytelling. Well, if they're huge superhero fans, if they're really a part of that machine that is Disney or Warner Brothers, or just sort of the corporatized action films, or Star Wars, it's really like, hey, well, now I can kind of like lay down in bed and watch a TV series of The Mandalorian, so I can get more of my theater experience just in a different way. And so that storytelling that I think makes a film like Nobody so unique, not because it's like it hasn't been done before, but because it harkens back to a time where I really felt that films, franchise or not franchise, were just at a very high bar in regards to like the visual storytelling. Like it makes those films just have less eyeballs on them. But it's honestly like we got to give credit where credit's due. Like these big companies, Disney, Star Wars, and Marvel, they're crushing it. They're doing a great job getting people out there. It's just these negative effects aren't being talked about enough.
Right. And that's what kind of, in order to tie it back to my original point about the Snyder fans and kind of my problems with them, even if the movies that they're championing are way better than the movies that we're getting, my problem is not with the with the movies that they want. Again, after watching Justice League, well, specifically Zack Snyder's version, I'm all in favor. I'm like, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, fuck every other DC movie that they're doing. I don't give a shit about any of them. I literally just want these movies. But again, it goes back to, I think, what you were saying on our podcast about it, which is that it sets a dangerous precedent and continues to, where because they're the voices that scream the loudest, those are the voices that the studios are going to continue to satisfy more and more. And because those are constantly seeming to be the dominant, it's going to cause more of these movies to fall through the cracks. And what's even worse is it's going to cause studios to make even more bad decisions when it comes to these types of movies. And then who gets blamed? The little guy, because God forbid a studio actually admit that they made a mistake, Ha! That would be the day.
Man, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. But, I have really nothing more to add without diluting, I think. The
only thing that I just wanted to say is Christopher Lloyd is a goddamn national treasure. He's finally showing his age, because there was a solid period from like 1970 to 2000 where he just didn't age. What's it called? He was just like, he just turned like 40 but he looked 60, and then he just stayed that age for like 40 years consecutively. And he's finally starting to show his age. He's getting up there, and he has like 3 scenes in this movie? Not even. He maybe has like 5 lines. And the minute that he takes out that shotgun and shoots those 2 henchmen that come after him, I'm like, MVP. I love Odenkirk in the movie, but MV friggin' P award goes to Christopher Lloyd, like no question.
Yeah,
and
my only other negative what I was going to say was my only other negative really is the fact that I just want to know more. I want to know more about his character, his friend who comes and bails him out. I want to know more about his family's history. Christopher Lloyd, he was amazing. He stole the scenes he was in. I really want to know more about them because, man, this was like a different kind of action. And so, yeah, man, I don't know. We could talk about the future maybe of this franchise real quick before we jump out of here, or
yeah. So I was actually gonna bring that up because I actually have it written. There's a specific section on the Wikipedia page for this movie that is entitled "Potential Crossover with John Wick," and the description goes: in March 2021. The director, Isla Neischuler, I believe is the name of it, discussed the potential of a crossover film featuring Nobody and the John Wick franchise, of which Nobody screenwriter Derek Kolstad was the screenwriter, and of which Nobody producer David Leitch, who also directed the first John Wick before going on to direct Deadpool 2 and Atomic Blonde and Hobbs and Shaw, expressed interest in the possibility based on the film's similar tone. So my question for you is, based off of that, was there a version? Did they have a post-credit scene that ended with Bob Odenkirk picking up a phone and hearing Keanu Reeves' voice as John Wick on the other end? Was there a version of this movie that ever existed?
Okay, yes or no? Are there post-credit scenes in John Wick? Then no. Because I think that this is a different type of filmmaking. I think this is a different caliber of filmmaker, and I think that they're not as quick to sort of show you how the sausage is made, whereas the Marvel formula quickly presents itself after you've seen a few movies, or you can kind of see what DC's going for after you've seen a few. I think that this, to me, is a more mature, I'm going to say mature style of action storytelling, and so with that being said, I think there's definitely been talks behind the scenes. How could there not be, right? But I think...
Right. Well, I guess, okay, so let me rephrase my point then, because post-credit scene was the wrong word to use. That little stinger at, like, the end of a movie before the credits rolled. Like, John Wick 3 actually did this really, really cool little bit where they built up to John Wick 4 in a really cool way that I won't spoil for when you see the movie. But like, you know what I mean? Like, remember at like the end of Freddy versus Jason, and Jason comes out and he's holding Freddy's head, and then Freddy's head blinks to the camera. It's like, see you next time. It's like those little, it was kind of the post-credit scenes before post-credit scenes came, and they ended up stopping doing that because the problem is they would always try to build up the sequels that sometimes just would never end up happening, and you would just kind of get like this ambiguous cliffhanger that just goes nowhere, So what I'm saying is that, was there a version where at the end of this movie, before the credits roll, after he leaves the warehouse with all the dead Russians, he goes outside, he maybe like picks up a payphone, and then John Wick is on the other end. That's kind of what I mean.
If it wasn't shot, I think they had to have at least had a conversation about it.
But they had to have. There's no way they did.
I mean, look, I'm not, so I want everyone to know I'm not against big franchises. I'm just against the way that these big franchises get so complacent and so comfortable because they know that they got us.
And kind of the enhanced corporatization of it, and how that infringes upon the quality of the story.
Exactly. And so exactly that. And so I would actually be really comfortable with this sort of universe becoming another one of the cinematic universes we have because, man, it offers some competition into the medium, I think.
Well, if only because if there were ever two franchises that go so stylistically hand in hand, like there are literal sequences in this movie that are pulled from John Wick. Like the first John Wick movie, without spoiling anything, has a scene where he fights a bunch of guys in his house and he kicks and he murders all of them. You know, different way, obviously, but still a very similar sequence. You know, so you see what I'm saying? So if there was ever a chance for there to be some kind of some kind of crossover, like this would be it, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Damn, dude. I really wish I watched the first John Wick for this, but I guess it'll make when I watch it more enriching of an experience. So.
Yeah, just makes it that much more enriching when you do watch it. So for my final thoughts on this movie, Nobody was another welcome, refreshing surprise. Again, in the year of 2021, still coming off of the year of 2020, I'm still kind of trying to take my joys where I can. Again, I've still seen relatively few movies within the first quarter of this year as opposed to previous years. I still have a lot that I'm trying to get to, but within the small selection of movies that we've had so far to choose from, I still think that Nobody is a welcome addition to that canon, and it is a more than refreshing movie. I highly recommend, again, if you're able to go out and watch this movie in a theater. You will not regret it. It is an absolutely fun action ride. It's an action movie with some actual heart. It's an action movie with some story. It's an action movie with a great lead and some kick-ass like choreography and action, but it's also just hella fun. And it's a fun time overall. And even though it may leave a little bit to be desired at the end, and even though I think that there's still a little bit, again, like a tiny micro nitpick with kind of the motivation of the character and certain things that can be a little bit confusing, this is still, one of the most enjoyable movies that I've seen so far from this year, and this is a 4 out of 5 stars for me, easily.
Well said, man. Yeah, I think I'm going to echo a lot of Dom's sentiment here. It was so refreshing to just see someone do something new, something original for an action film. You know, we're not reviving something from the 80s. We're not making a 95th installment in an ongoing series. And we're actually using some really great storytelling techniques that I thought young creators didn't know existed anymore. And so for all those reasons, on top of what I said in this podcast tonight, I got to give this film, I think, a 4 out of 5 as well. I've seen arguably more movies into the start of a year than I ever have. And so I feel I can...
How many movies are you up to
now?
now?
To 8 or 9. Probably 9 with Nobody.
Right. I think with this movie, this puts me up to like 13, which is still like relative, like so freaking small. Like, I mean, you usually by this time of the year, like in previous years pre the pandemic, I would be at like 20 or 30 movies by now.
Yeah, well, hence pre the pandemic, right? And so out of that,
pre the pandemic,
exactly. Out of that canon, like you said, this is definitely top upper tier. You know, it's worth seeing, guys. I would.
Without a shadow of a doubt. Now, Michael, my last question for you before we depart is better or worse than Cherry?
Oh, so much better than Cherry, dude. I really don't like that movie. That movie's...
I feel like rhetorical question should have been stamped on that like so many times that I should have like had it like written across my forehead.
I just need to remind everyone how much I dislike
Cherry
that
too,
movie.
But
so I don't dislike it. It was fine. It just didn't do it for me like it did it for everyone else.
I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. So with that being said, people, those were our thoughts on the movie Nobody, starring Bob Odenkirk. Please let us know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. We'd very much like to know what they are. And again, even if you haven't gotten a chance to see it and are unable to, follow the online discourse because it's hella fun. And, you know, again, I'm not advocating for any sort of online piracy, but, you know, there are ways. That is all that I'm going to say to that. And so, with that being said, again, click the like button, click the subscribe button, click the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. Again, any sort of clicking on this page just helps us out as far as being able to continue to provide you, the people, the best possible content that we can. And, of course, you can keep up to date with our schedule by following us on our social media pages, Facebook and Instagram, at Talkin' TV or at Talkin' TV Podcast. It's where we post every single day going forward. And I also did want to make the people aware of a quick change in programming that will be occurring starting next week. So for the rest of this week, we have got our Godzilla vs. Kong live stream reaction to it that will be up in podcasting from the following week. That will be going up on Wednesday, and then this coming Friday, we will be doing a recap for episode 3 of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, for which I will be back for. The following week, however, we're doing a little change up. for our schedule. It's been a little while since we've done this, but, given, the state of things and just how things are winding down now, kind of post the little, the craziness, let's say, of the middle of the pandemic, we are doing a little bit of a schedule change where now, so we will no longer be going live on Monday nights, unfortunately. So for all of you guys who tuned in for us on Monday nights, thank you again.
It's been
for
amazing.
That. We will now, it has been quite a ride, but we will now be uploading clips of the podcast episodes throughout the week. So we'll be uploading clips on, run it down with me, Chris, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Those will be the days. We'll be uploading roughly anywhere from 10 to 20-minute clips from the podcast episodes, which will exist still in audio form in their usual home on Spotify and Anchor and Apple Podcasts, where they will exist in full audio form, but they will exist now in clips on the channel. We will still have our Wednesday content the same. We will still have our Friday content the same as far as the
We'll still be hanging out with you live and chatting and BS
future.
on Fridays for sure.
Oh, yeah. We'll still be doing all of that with you guys, but this is just a little bit of a change up. It kind of allows us to give you guys more goodies in like shorter nuggets.
We're going to be giving them content every day of the week. We haven't done that.
Exactly. We're doing content. We're doing it. We're doing it 7 days a week. We're doing 7 days a week now going forward. And again, we're just about wrapped up with March. We're going into April. We've got a lot of fun, crazy stuff planned for you guys for April. Stay tuned and follow our socials in order to find out what it is that we've got planned. Chris, where can the good people find you? As always,
the good people can find me all across social media at Christian Evanko. Evanko spelled Evanko. I make music. I have another podcast called Talkin', spelled the same way our show's spelled, with Andrew and Chris. It's more of a movie, life, variety type show. So yeah, please come and follow us over there. And of course, check out my music through the links in my Instagram and Twitter and Facebook bios. And Dom, what about yourself, man? Where can they find you?
Well, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews, where I mostly just make fun of dumb movie news and post sarcastic memes and that I find funny. I found that recent string of Batman Ghetto memes that are some of the funniest things I've ever read that I sent to you the other day. And oh man, that was such a joy to watch. It was such a joy to read. And I'm like, oh man, I remember when I found these originally back during the pandemic and how funny that was. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do on my social media. Pretty much everything else I do is related to this podcast. I pretty much regard that I really don't have any existence outside of this podcast anymore. But movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, people, as you guys know, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.